Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third and final lecture concluding this Scrum Master Primer, a short course facilitated by IT Masters and Planet. My name is Guy and I'll be your MC tonight, and as always, Sarah Ireton will be your lecturer. As discussed in previous weeks, part of the goal of this course is to promote knowledge of the fact Planet offer the Scrum Master certification. It should be noted that this course is not a certification for Scrum Master. You can take a 2-day course with Planet, which is an internationally recognized qualification. It can be completed online or in person, and this course allows you, or enrolling in this course allows you to claim a 15% discount if you use the promotional code CSU Scrum 17 on their website, which is www.planettesting.com/au. Should be a dot, I think, .au. If you have any questions about the Scrum Master certification or course questions, please contact info@planettesting.com for more info. I'll put that up in the chat screen soon. Anyway, this course will hopefully have been and continue to be of use to those of you who are not in a position to take the Planet course. This week we'll introduce several more concepts within the Scrum system to assist in building an overall idea of what Scrum is. Given it's the last lecture, just some housekeeping before getting into things. Next week, from the 18th of April, the course exam will be available to students for a period of 1 week. You will have until 11:59 Australian Eastern Standard Time now on the 25th of April to complete it. Despite this, we recommend not leaving your sitting of the exam to the last minute in case of technical difficulties. You are required to complete the homework from each week before you can access the exam and earn your certificate. This can be done until the close of the exam period, but again, we recommend not leaving this until the last moment because you will not be able to sit the exam without having completed the homework, which in this case is posting in the forums either answers to the questions or constructive discussion of answers already put in there. The exam consists of 40 multiple choice questions, which you will have 1 hour to complete. These questions come from the content presented in Sarah's lectures in the last 3 weeks, or last 2 weeks and this week. Please note that the exam can only be attempted once, so do not attempt the exam until you are certain you are ready. A reminder email will be sent out about the exam once it's available, and if you have any technical difficulties like talking, please email us at shortcourses@itmasters.edu.au as soon as possible. I'll put that in the chat function as well, the chat box as well. And don't worry, I'll repeat the exam information towards the end of this lecture as well. One last thing, I'm sorry, before we get going with this lecture. Once you've completed the course, we would really appreciate it if you took a couple extra minutes to complete the course satisfaction survey quiz. The link for which is found at the bottom of the IT Masters course page underneath the exam information. The quiz contains a few questions related to the Scrum Master Primer short course and IT Masters in general. Your answers are reviewed at the conclusion of the short course by the IT Masters administration team, and they do assist us with improving our delivery. So your feedback is very valuable and will help make future courses better. So please will you have a look for me once the exam is complete. Thank you. As always, do get involved in the chat during the webinar, and with that in mind, please welcome for the final time, Sarah.
Thanks, Guy, and welcome everyone to week 3, our last week together for the Scrum Master Primer course. Just as a reminder, in week 1 we went through an overview of the Scrum framework and the Scrum Master's role and responsibilities. Last week, week 2, we covered all the elements of that framework in more detail, and we also went through Scrum values and the concept of just enough. This week, we will be covering the product backlog, release and adaptive planning, and also talking a little bit about the role played by the Scrum Master in these areas. So the Scrum product backlog is basically a list of all the things that need to be done within the project, and it can be seen as a replacement for the traditional requirement specification artifacts that you might have seen on a non-agile project. Items on the backlog can be of a technical nature or be user-centric, but they must always add value for the customer. Now the backlog is owned by the product owner and all entries are prioritised and ordered according to that product owner. The Scrum Master, the Scrum team and other stakeholders will all contribute to it, and it's considered a living document that obviously therefore needs to be maintained regularly. The level of detail for an item will depend on the position of the item within the product backlog. So items at the top of the list, which are obviously higher priority, would normally be more detailed, as they're likely to be something that's going to be in the next sprint and we need to work on it, we need a bit more information. All the entries need to be estimated because this supports planning. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And so the Scrum Master, the product owner, the Scrum team should all attend the estimation meetings when they work out estimates for all the items. It needs to be noted though that this does not have any action items or really low-level detailed tasks. That's nothing that we would find on the product backlog because those are part of sprint planning, and we talked about that last week. So the backlog needs regular attention and care. It needs to be managed carefully. At the start of a project, the team and the product owner and everyone starts by writing down everything they can think of, and that normally happens quite easily. And that's normally enough to get started for the first sprint. But after the initial setup, the product backlog has to be maintained. This was often known or previously known, some people still say it, backlog grooming. And it's an ongoing process and it comprises of a number of things. As new items are discovered, they're added to the list. Existing ones might be changed or removed as necessary. Obviously the most important items are moved to the top, and preparing of the high priority entries for the next sprint planning meeting. So maybe they flesh them out a bit with more detail, as I said. We potentially re-estimate entries as part of maintenance, and we might also break down product backlog items into multiple smaller items if they're too large. Often these are known as epics. The Scrum product owner is responsible for making sure that the Scrum product backlog is in good shape. And this is a collaborative process. The collaborative maintenance of that backlog helps to clarify the requirements, and it helps create a buy-in from the team on what they're going to be working on. So when we're using the Scrum framework, the Scrum Master should ensure about 10% of the Scrum team's total time is reserved for maintaining the backlog, and that would include the discussions and the estimation of items. And something else we previously discussed in week 1, which is that the Scrum Master is a servant leader and serves in a number of ways, in particular when the team is undertaking the product backlog maintenance. So for example, they would be helping the product owner with techniques for effective backlog management, helping the Scrum team understand the need for clear and concise product backlog items, and ensuring the product owner knows how to arrange the backlog to maximize value for the customer. So a release is to deliver a significant theme or item to the market. It's a subset of the product backlog, commonly known as the release backlog. A release theme is simply a high-level categorization concept to enable the selection of what types of product backlog items should be included as part of a release. And after identifying which stories would go into a particular release through the release planning process, the stories then become part of a release backlog, which the team will then estimate for the amount of time needed to complete each item. And like the product backlog, the release backlog is not static. It will change during the release when new knowledge is available and entries in the release backlog are changed or re-estimated. So again, it needs to be revisited and updated in regular intervals. One of the things we discussed last week was the sprint planning meeting, and during that the team devises the individual tasks and the low-level detail that must be performed to build the product increment and decide who will do what task. That body of work then becomes the sprint backlog. and it would be on a Scrum board or a task board, and that board is for the team and the stakeholders to have visibility and tracking of the tasks through to completion. So the sprint backlog is a living artifact. It's updated on a daily basis. At the end of the day, all the remaining efforts are updated, and this defines how much work is left until the sprint goal is reached. I'm going to pause the presentation now to answer some questions. Guy, what do we have?
We've got a few questions. Couple of questions about the exam. I'll just say you can head to the learn.itmasters.edu.au website for all the exam information. But we have a question from Ninad Patil. In a scrum of scrums, all teams coordinated by the product owner. Does the product owner manage backlog of all the scrum teams?
The product owner doesn't manage the teams. The Scrum Master is basically, I mean, I don't, no one really manages them. I don't like that word. The product owner is responsible for being the conduit between the customer and the team. Now, in a scrum of scrums, which is where you've obviously got a number of teams, I think it's something that came up the other week, you may have one product owner that is shared with all the teams. It does depend how big the scrum of scrums is. But typically, if it's a large, very large enterprise project, there would be a number of product owners, and there would often be what's known as a chief product owner. Similarly, there will be a number of Scrum Masters for each team, and then there might be a chief Scrum Master. Chief, yeah, that's the way it works in Scrum of Scrums.
Okay, a question from Sudeep, which was just knocked out by another question. Sorry, folks. How different is sprint backlog compared to release backlog? Are they similar?
Well, I could answer that, but I think it's one of my homework questions.
Ah, there you go.
I'm not sure if I should say too much to this one. Basically, the release obviously is a number of sprints. I'm going to talk about it more, and the sprint is just the sprint work. That's all I'm going to say. There you go. It's a homework question.
Thank you. A question from Anoop. How does the Scrum Manager manage the moving goalposts under pressure from the product owner?
I'm going to talk about that with adaptive planning. But basically, we embrace change, but they can't just change it at any moment in time. Once we're in the sprint, we don't change. They're allowed to change for the next sprint.
Okay, and might ask the last question for now from Patrick. It's a Planet question. How different is Planet certification from Scrum Master Certified or Certified Scrum Master?
No different. It's the same.
There you go.
It's an internationally recognised Scrum Master certification that we offer.
Alrighty, thanks very much. There's still more questions, of course, to answer. I'll prioritise them as we go.
Okay, so moving on just to planning, we know that Agile is all about small, frequent releases. And so Agile projects, and Scrum does the same thing, they typically plan in one of two ways. They either work to a fixed, immovable date, which would be known as date-driven, or they can have a set number of requirements or stories, whatever you want to use, and an open release date, and that's known as feature-driven. So for date-driven release dates, the team works backwards from the release date that they've been asked to hit, and they work backwards to determine the number of sprints that can be performed within the release cycle, and then obviously that will then dictate what work could actually be completed in that time. For feature-driven, which is where the product owner or the customer is saying they need a fixed set of stories or a fixed set of functionality, the team works forwards and they try to estimate, based on their discussions with the customer and the product owner, which features need to be delivered first, and then they will try and work out when they believe they could deliver them and by what day, and then the next one and the next one, and so on and so on. So them working forwards So release planning is the first activity where the product owner and customer and the team and everyone meet to scope what would be included in the release. And the outcome is a release plan, which should identify the work the team hopes to deliver and includes the features and stories and defect fix list if there's any outstanding defects to fix. It defines the duration and end dates for each sprint that will be performed within the release. It identifies the resources that are available and an estimate of their rate of production, which is their velocity. I'm going to talk about that more later. And ultimately it sets out the quality and readiness criteria for the release. So it's a very high level plan that has the following attributes. It's a guideline that reflects expectations about which features will be implemented and completed. It serves as a base to monitor progress within the project and describes whether releases will be intermediate deliveries to production, so done during the project, or whether we're going to just do one final delivery at the end. Either way is up to whatever the customer needs. So the release planning meeting is obviously a key event, and everyone who has a direct effect on the product outcome should be involved. So that could include the product owner, the Scrum Master, the Scrum team, the business analyst, the customer, the end users. And obviously in order to create it, there has to be a number of things available. A prioritised and estimated product backlog, the estimated velocity of the Scrum team, and conditions of satisfaction. What we mean by that is what are the goals for the schedule, the scope and the resources. Now, Agile projects approach estimation via accessing the features, tasks, user stories using some measure of effort. And the standard effort measures of days and hours can still be used, but many teams use story points. Story points are a relative measure of feature or user story difficulty and complexity. As an example, if one feature was twice as complex as another feature, it would have twice the story points. The use of story points enables the team to separate effort, i.e. how difficult it is to do, and speed, how quickly can we do it. They can also assign story points to some form of equivalent measure. For example, one story point equals half an ideal day's work. However, due to the lack of detail at the release planning stage, many teams might not use story points. They might use t-shirt sizes or dogs. Yes, I did say dogs. We could have small, medium, large, t-shirt, Jack Russell, Bulldog, Golden Retriever for release planning. And then they might move on to story points as more details are available. Of course, the release plan will be subject to change as new information comes to light. What we thought was going to be released may need to be changed due to real-time feedback of information that wasn't known prior to defining the release. This is detailed information that wasn't known when we initially selected features and did our estimation. Velocity is measured in the same units as feature estimates, whether that's story points, days, ideal days or hours, all of which, as I've said, are considered acceptable. And it doesn't matter how big a point is as long as they are consistently applied within the team. And the main idea behind velocity is to help teams estimate how much work they can complete in a given time period based on how quickly similar work was previously completed. It's about establishing a rhythm for the team to deliver. As we've seen, velocity is a key metric in planning, and it's calculated by adding up all estimates of the features successfully delivered in a sprint. Its expected velocity may change from sprint to sprint, and of course it will typically change if a team member is changed. To calculate velocity, a team first has to determine how many units of work each task is worth and the length of each interval, that's their sprint length. And during development, the team has to keep track of completed tasks, and at the end of the interval, count the number of units of work completed during that interval, aka the sprint. The team then writes down the calculated velocity in a chart or on a graph. In the first week or the first sprint, probably has a little bit of value, but it's essential because it's about providing a basis for comparison moving forward. Each week, each sprint after that, the velocity tracking will provide better information as the team provides better estimates and become more used to the methodology. And of course, the Scrum Master has a big part to play in helping the team improve velocity. It's done in a number of ways, things that we have discussed before, removing those roadblocks. So things that are holding the team up. The Scrum Master is the person that's going to go and stop that, slow down so the velocity keeps ticking at the rhythm that they want. They're guarding the team from being interrupted from outside interference, and obviously ensuring everything is time boxed, keeping everyone on track on our rhythm that we need to be. Like any meeting, all attendees have a responsibility to prepare for the planning. The product owner has responsibilities. They're defining the release plan, the dates and themes, ensuring that they have prioritised the backlog, and they need to be prepared to discuss the product vision and be open to negotiations that may occur about which features can be included or not. Obviously, the Scrum team has to review the features, backlog. They need to have a high-level understanding of the features that are in there that might be included. They need to make sure they determine the mechanism that they're going to use to record their high-level estimates, effort hours, story points, t-shirts, dogs, and define their team velocity, so what they believe the work capacity for the team is going to be. The Scrum Master also has responsibilities during planning. Of course, they're setting up and facilitating the release planning session. They are going to remove obstacles that would affect the team from being able to undertake their responsibilities. They might walk the product owner through more technical user stories if that's necessary. Depends. Some product owners are a little bit more technical than others. And of course, it's all about encouraging collaboration between the team and the product owner to work out a release plan that is achievable. Once again, I'm going to pause the presentation to do some questions if we have some. Guy, I assume we do.
Yep, of course. I've got a couple of questions from Donald and Gary about the hierarchy of backlogs. Is there a hierarchy?
Yes, it needs to be prioritised, and that's the responsibility of the product owner. So normally what we say is the story has to have business value. What's the biggest business value? So, you could use high, medium and low, but that doesn't work very well because then you've got 3 high, and which is the highest of the high. So sometimes they just use some numerical value. I mean, it doesn't equate to anything apart from an 800 is more important to build us and put into production before a 700.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions about measuring value as well, and measuring things like effort. How do you quantify these things? I guess that is again a negotiated question.
There's 2 parts to that question. So value to the customer was the first part, is that right?
That's right.
That's the product owner's job. It's what's most important. What do we want first? I mean, for example, if you're building a system where you're going to implement various different aspects, something will come first. So if you're a business, the first thing you need is how are you going to get your customers' details, for example. So that's a higher priority, because if I can't capture customers' details, I've got no customers, I've got no business. I can't sell anything. What was the second part of the question, Guy?
How do you quantify things like effort?
So I think they're talking about estimation and velocity and effort for the team. That's the team have all got skills. We've got developers, we've got BAs, we've got testers in the team. We all know. I'm an ex test consultant. You know how long things take to test. You know how long things take to develop as a developer, and so they might not get it right first time. That's the whole point. That's what I was saying about their velocity and their estimation. But the more the team does it, the better they'll be at it, and the more correct they will be. You know, we use the word estimate, and obviously it always is an estimate, but they'll get better and better at it, and they'll hit, that's the idea, they'll hit their rhythm.
Okay, question, just two more questions, I think. A question from Timothy. Do you assign time for the planning responsibilities? Is this part of the release backlog?
Well, of course, obviously time needs to be allowed, but like everything, it's time boxed. So this is, I mean, when we talk about the maintenance or the grooming of the backlog, I mean, that's to make sure that the product backlog is in a reasonable state to allow for a release planning. I think, was that what was being asked?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
If not, Timothy, send in another question and ask us to elaborate however you'd like. One final question from Cosmos, which will allow us to clear up something that we were planning on clearing up later anyway. Does this short course, does attending this short course count anyway towards the mandatory 2 days training required in order to set the Scrum Master certification?
Well, the fact of the matter is that this is just a taster. Yeah, I mean, the idea is you've already got prior learning. So you're getting the discount, but you'll already know some of the stuff going in. And therefore, you know, you'll have a much better understanding of other things that are talked about, and of course be that much more prepared after the course to sit the exam sooner, if that's, you know, important.
Beauty. Thank you. We'll keep going and I'll get some more questions ready for you for the next question session, which might run quite some time, folks. It's the last session, so we're prepared to answer quite a few questions.
Okay, so a release theme. We talked about having a theme for release. Basically, it's a high-level categorization concept to enable the selection of particular types of product backlog items that would be included as part of a release. Stories usually have too fine a detail for defining what would be delivered in a release. So it's about taking a high-level view and looking at the features that the system will implement. It's easier to look at accessing the priorities of a feature than it is to work out you know, the priority within hundreds of lower level user stories, for example. So we use the feature, we could use that then to drive the idea of a theme for selecting which features we want to put in. So the choice of theme is about enabling the customer, the business, the product owners to pick and prioritize the areas of functionality, the features that they want in the release. And I just said in the question, you know, for example, customer or reports or something like that. We're going to work on reports for this release. And of course, as you do further analysis, it derives more details to create the stories, and dependencies might be identified, as well as some of the stories proving to be more complex than we originally considered, and those issues will then often result in some of the stories being placed back onto the product backlog and being removed from the release. So I've talked a little bit about the whole release process, and here we've got a slide that shows it. You can see it as a visual representation of all the pieces that I've just been talking about and how everything fits together within a release theme. So what we've got is a prioritized list of features. So our theme is reporting, and the highest priority feature is all the reports for auditing. Our next one is customized, and then feature 3 is out of the box. And what you would do then is you would obviously have whatever backlog items, stories, tasks. There could be a design spike, these defect fixes, pre-existing low-level defects that we deferred to a later release, and as I said, if the team is working forwards or backwards, whatever, but they start to pencil in what they're going to be doing in each sprint until everything is sorted out. So this slide is quite a good visual representation to me of all the slides that I've been talking to up until now. So as we've said, Agile methods all use what's known as adaptive planning. And the Scrum team is working based on the priorities set by the product owner for that backlog. If the product owner wants to change the priorities, they can do so for the next sprint. And this is supported by the concept of adaptive planning. Responding to change allows the team to support changing requirements throughout the project so that they deliver software the customer actually wants now, not what they thought they wanted originally, and not just meeting something that we said we would on this date because that's what we said 3 months ago. It doesn't work like that. We have a 2-level planning approach in Scrum. So traditional models use predictive planning, which is where you plan for a long time into the future. And anyone that's worked on one of those projects will probably know what I'm talking about when I say some of those Gantt charts you could print out and wallpaper a decent sized living room. They're that massive and that long into the future. But that doesn't work with Agile. So that's why we use adaptive planning. And adaptive planning focuses on planning for the next sprint only, really in detail. We're not trying to plan months in advance. So it takes into account real-world information, feedback, changes, and we adapt the plan accordingly. So in Scrum we have 2 kinds of plan. We have the release plan. It's a coarse grain. It's a roadmap. It's not set in stone. We know it might change. And then we have a series of smaller, very fine-grained detailed plans for each sprint, and that's what we do at part of the sprint planning. So rolling wave adaptive sprint planning has a major benefit, which is that it embraces change. It's easily achievable due to the 2-level nature of planning in the Scrum process, and again it supports the Agile Manifesto and the 12 principles. Now the slide I'm showing now builds on a rolling wave adaptive planning approach for the sprint. In sprint 1 it was tentatively planned that feature 2 would be completed in sprint 2 based on what was known at the time. During the sprint planning meeting for sprint 2, it was realised that feature 2 had a dependency on feature 9. So feature 9 was estimated to take 2 weeks, and it was agreed that feature 8 would be completed as well and could be done in the same period of time. The plan for the second sprint is now to complete both features 8 and 9. Therefore, the previous sprint 2 features, which was feature 2, will now need to be replanned. We don't know when that's going to be yet. It depends. If it's the top of the list for the release backlog for sprint 3, then it would go in, and feature 23, which is currently shown for sprint 3, would move out, and so on and so forth. So this is what adaptive planning is. And that's probably one of the myths in Agile, that you could be in the middle of the sprint and the product owner can change their mind. No, it doesn't work like that. They're allowed to change their mind and make something the top of the list for the next one. And that's we manage that change through doing adaptive planning. Now we've actually got through it quite quickly, but that gives us more time to answer questions. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you feel inspired to continue on and achieve your full International Scrum Master accredited certification with Planet. I believe Guy mentioned it, but because if you've taken this primer, there's a discount, especially for the IT Master students. Like the previous weeks, we have some homework for you, which is to answer some or all of the questions presented. You post your answers on the forum or constructively respond to another student's post or discussion. So the homework questions, which is why I sneakily didn't answer too much to a question earlier. We had, as a Scrum Master, how would you explain the differences between a product, a release and a sprint backlog to your team? Number 2, why is it so important that all items in the Scrum product backlog are estimated? Number 3, explain why the Scrum Master needs to understand the concept of velocity when planning. And I asked you, I briefly talked about adaptive planning, but I'm interested in people giving an example of why it is undertaken and also why might it happen. Given a real life example is what I would like to see, and why what the advantages to the business are by taking this approach. I'm going to hand back over to Guy now.
All righty, we have plenty of questions to get us through. We'll start with one from Valiant. What?
You're going to talk about the exam or Q&A?
Oh, do you want to do the questions now? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, I'll just do the slide change. That's okay.
Yeah, sorry. I'll talk about the exam right at the end, folks. How does adaptive planning work with a date-driven program? Question from Mandy.
The date is fixed, the scope is not. That's the answer. No, I should elaborate. Basically, if it's date driven, then they might not get everything that they want, and if they need everything, then that's why we do feature driven.
Okay, thank you. Donald has asked for maybe an example of what would go in a coarse-grained plan.
That's the sprint planning, and that's when stories are actually scheduled for the sprint. So we talked about sprint planning last week. I mean, I could spend all night talking about it, but it's realistically where the team actually work out all the little tasks. You know, for every story, someone's got to code it, someone's got to test it, for example, right? There's other things that need to be done, and they work out who's doing what. And that's what is normally on their task board. And if anyone's got Scrum teams or Agile teams where they work, that's what all the post-it notes on the wall are, probably. So that's where it all happens.
Okay, Valiant has asked whether there is an industry standard average velocity, and would you take that into account when trying to come up with your own estimations?
Absolutely not. Velocity is absolutely unique to a team. It's nothing that can be used to measure one Agile team in an organisation against another. It is absolutely unique to a team. It's one of those things that has come up before. But because the team decides everything, the team decides what, for example, a point means to them. So we might have said that a point means a day's work, right? So our velocity could be 10. But another team might have decided that 1 point means an hour's work, and so their velocity could be 250. It's nothing that you can, there's no standard, there's no measurement. It's unique to an individual team. I can't stress that enough.
So a follow-up question from Patrick, like, is there any way that you have seen to benchmark teams?
No, because we don't do that. They're self-organising, they're self-directed. Their goal is to deliver in the sprint what they've committed to deliver in the sprint, which is whatever is in the sprint backlog. That's how we measure. And you know, at the end of the day, a newly formed team, you know, I think it was something that Leanne said, but you don't take too much. When you're new, you start small, and you know, you start with one story, for example, but at least get it done, right? They're trying to get their heads around everything. But the way I mean, I don't like the word benchmark, but at the end of the day, for me, a team that is delivering what they say they will deliver is doing their job. If they're not, then the Scrum Master is one of the main people to work out what's going on and fix it.
Kate has asked, what is a design spike?
Basically, sometimes when you're working in a sprint, they come up against a difficulty where they've got some sort of technical issue and they're not quite sure how they're going to resolve it. So often what happens is they stop and they do what's known as a design spike, and it's a very short, obviously time box like everything else, piece of work where everyone sort of sits around and gets their heads around it and try and figures out what the solution is going to be, so that then we can hit the ground running.
Sunil has asked, at what point is it ideal to determine a minimal value of the product? Or MVP?
I'm not sure what he means by the, I don't understand the question in terms of at what point. I mean, that, you know, the value is whatever is valuable, and that's something that needs to be done as stories and planning are worked out. I think we've sort of already answered that. It's whatever is valuable, you know, to the customer, and it's the same concept.
Sure. All right. Still got a few more questions. Gary's asked, is there a certification for a product owner that you guys offer, or will one be coming?
Actually, I'm not sure. We don't offer one at the moment, but we're always introducing new courses. So keep an eye out on our website for that one.
Patrick's asked a follow-up question about design spikes. Are they added to the backlog, or is it supposed to be catered for in the story which triggered it?
No, it's obviously a new task that goes on the backlog. I mean, it, you know, because it disrupts, it adds to the velocity. It would add, there's obviously time spent doing it. So it needs to go on the sprint backlog. If they have something where they know that in order to deliver a story, they need to do it ahead of time. So sometimes it happens when they're in the middle of a sprint, in which case they hadn't planned for it as part of their velocity. But it could be a backlog item that they know coming up in the next sprint, or for one of the stories that they have to spend a bit of time fixing, I can't speak now either, Guy. Working out what they're going to do to resolve that, and they've planned for it. So sometimes they're planned, sometimes they just happen. They hit a wall and they need to stop and just try and resolve something.
Patrick has sent in his thanks. Valiant has asked, are there any IT solutions? And I think it's an interesting question too. Are there any IT solutions or products for which Agile is definitely not suited? When would you not use Agile? Or is it just a panacea?
Personally, the biggest hindrance to Agile is cultural mind shift. It's a whole new ball game, and there have been organisations that I have trained where they're interested. I've taught the Certified Agile Essentials and Scrum Master and stuff, but at the end of the day, some organisations, some industries, some industries isn't the right word, government departments are set up where they are command and control. And they are done for a reason. That is done for safety, for security, for all involved, the nature of what they do. And so in those sorts of organisations, it's not necessarily a good fit. I don't want to say you can't ever do it, but any organisation that cannot, for whatever reason, allow this change of attitude where, you know, we have to have a manager and the manager tells you what to do and you tell that person what to do, it's not going to work because of this whole self-organising, self-directing concept. You know, high risk, safety critical, cultural mindset, those are some of the things that maybe aren't a good fit, but it's for every organisation to look into and decide. Some projects in an organisation are more suited than others. That's my personal opinion.
Okay. Valiant has sent his thanks too. We've got a story from Ninad that I think might be interesting for a comment from you. I worked on a project where the scope was defined and also the end date. but it was
Not
still running
agile. You don't have to say anything else. That's not agile. I don't care what they called it.
Ninad says we ended up with lots of overtime with a sad face. So you can attempt agile and do it poorly. Is that a common? Is that related to
I believe
to the cultural shift?
One of the main things I said in week 1 is what is not agile. Did I or did I not? I made it quite clear. Just calling it agile does not make it agile. Unfortunately, there's a hell of a lot of people out there that say they're doing agile and they are not. You know, the bottom line is, and I sort of answered this, if it's feature driven, then the date is open. If it's date driven, then the scope is open. And what, sorry, I've forgotten the name, but whatever they did, which was fixed scope and fixed date, is not agile. It's a traditional, predictive, traditional planning, and I don't care what they called it. And one of the, you know, the mantras, I mean, you know, one of the things in agile is no overtime. Because we have time boxing, because we have, you know, because we have this velocity, because we have this rhythm, it's predictable and everyone goes home on time. No more cancelled weekends.
Thanks. Richard has asked a question and I'm going to need some clarification because I might have missed a term here. Is a WBS, not sure what that means, a necessary artifact while doing a Scrum? Some people in our organisation insist on a WBS despite us running sprints. Work breakdown structure. Thank you, Patrick.
Why would you do a work breakdown structure? That's what's on the sprint planning board. So a work breakdown structure to me, if I've, you know, it's what you have all the individual tasks in a MS project. Why are you using MS project? You've got a task board. You might have an electronic task board. Sprint planning is the equivalent to me of a traditional project work breakdown structure that I would put in something like MS project. Has that answered his question? Can we get a response? Because I think I have.
I'll just wait for that.
I mean, he was saying they were made to do it in the original question.
The original question I'll have to find again. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So some people in the organisation do insist on a WBS despite us running sprints.
Yes, and that is because their cultural mind shift issue. They don't understand that it's a whole new ball game and we don't do things like this. We have a task board that anyone can look at and that shows you what they're working on and what their breakdown is every sprint. And or you know, obviously the team, the idea is it's on the wall normally, but there's electronic task boards. Many teams use that. That is visible to the people that are asking. Should just make it visible to the people that are asking for work breakdowns in MS Project, if that's what they're asking for.
Okay, hope that helps. How do attendees, this is from Kate, prepare for meetings? Are there any workshops or documents that are shared with the team members beforehand?
Which meeting? There's a number of meetings and ceremonies in Scrum. Is she talking about the release planning meeting?
So is there a different process or preparation for each meeting?
Well, there's different, I mean, different meetings have different reasons. We talked about the ceremonies last week. So, you know, we've got a daily Scrum stand up. So, you know, that obviously I have to, as an attendee, I have to be prepared to be able to answer the 3 questions. If we're talking about preparing for the release planning meeting, then that was something that I talked about earlier.
As Kate was, yeah. That might have been answered, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you know, I talked about what the release planning process is all about and that everyone should be involved. But, you know, the bottom line is there is obviously some preparation because in order to actually come up with a plan, they need a prioritised and estimated product backlog. So, you know, there's stuff that happens before you can actually plan a release, of course, like any project. You don't just hit the ground running on day one. It doesn't work like that.
Right, we'll see what other questions we've got. Feel free to keep sending them in, folks. A question from Donald about maybe defining a term. Can you confirm that even though it is termed a backlog, a Scrum product backlog does not necessarily have to be a backlog, as it might be traditionally called. I'm perhaps bastardizing your question, Donald, I'm sorry. Can it be a forward-looking specification or outstanding items?
I'm not quite sure why he's asked. I mean, it's known as a backlog, but it's what he said. It's what they want to deliver. It's the concept of a requirements artifacts that you might have on traditional. So I mean, I think he sort of answered his own question. I mean, Scrum call it a backlog, you know. I mean, why would you want to call it anything else? But in theory, you could call it whatever you like. But what it is, and you know, that it's this list and who it's owned by and the value and all the things that I talked about, to me, still have to be there. But does it matter if you call it a backlog? I don't know. Scrum calls it that. If you're doing Scrum, why wouldn't you call it that?
Fair enough. I think it was just a confirmation question, you know, like there are a lot of new terms that, or words that perhaps have a new meaning, it seems, under this system. Which is something that I've struggled with just in trying to keep up with the questions themselves. Patrick has asked, oh no, sorry, I'll go to Jonathan's, who starts with a high-grade course. That's a good way for me to get to a question. Thanks, Jonathan. Jonathan's got an interesting project. He's got to prepare a 3-year forecast for effort and resources across 4 scrums, which are not in
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
No, go ahead.
What have I just said?
We're all learning.
What? I mean, that was spontaneous. How can you do a 3-year? We've just talked about how we do not do predictive planning, which plans a long time into the future. We've just said that, literally, like 3 slides ago. So, right. Again, I'm coming back to, if he's being asked to do that, then they don't understand what Agile is all about. Sorry, right. I shouldn't laugh, but that's a funny
one. I suppose the takeaway from that question, folks, and perhaps something I should do as well, is if we need to find out more, we're probably going to need to do the Master Primer, the Scrum Master certification course, to maybe get a full grounding on what these terms are and how to change the culture, our own cultural.
Well, but you know, it's not something that we delved into on this primer guide, but that. You know, I talked about the Scrum Master being the servant leader. I mean, they are the servant leader and the coach to the organisation as well. I mean, you're quite right. We've touched on, you know, the key things that people might be interested in, but the actual role of Scrum Master, you know, is coaching an organisation. And, you know, I can't stress enough, you know, I've seen it time and time again, and the sort of questions I'm being asked, where I'm saying, you know, but that's not Agile. This comes up on every training course I ever do, Agile or not. You know, I get people on other courses that, you know, say they're doing Agile where they work. You know, how many people are in your team? 20. Well, I'd say I don't really think that's very Agile, because we have you know, that's too big, and there's other things, you know, how long are your sprints? Well, it depends. Well, no, it doesn't. They should be set. So, you know, I definitely, that's probably one of the things that we haven't talked about that definitely is on the 2-day course, which is that you really are servant leads to an organisation. You are coaching everybody, and I'm talking from the top down. If the, you know, the top of the organisation down doesn't understand how this is going to change, we're not going to get metrics, we're not going to get all these reports that we used to have on traditional projects. It just makes life difficult for everybody and doesn't work very well.
Thanks. David has asked, maybe it's a 3-year sprint for Jonathan, I'm not sure. I'll just take that one as a comment. Mandy's asked, or suggesting perhaps that many companies do a mix of Agile and Waterfall. Would you say that that is possible? Would you say that that is perfectly fine? Can they be used together?
They can. We plan it. I know Leanne would have been a better person because she's on site as opposed to me, but I am very confident that Planet has a number of clients that had projects that were running in traditional, I mean waterfall's not the best, I'd prefer V model, but you know, different areas that were working in different ways, and it just needs a little bit more planning and coordination when you've got you know, one area or one application that might be using Agile and another that's not. But it can be done, and I'm very confident Planet has a number of clients that are doing that successfully. But it's one of those things where they really need education, people coming in, you know, that's why they call us at Planet to come in and help, because they can't necessarily change everywhere, every area to Agile.
All right, I'll hold a few questions for right at the end perhaps, see how we go for time, but we're 5 minutes to, so I reckon I might just go back to the exam slide, please, Sarah, and I'll repeat what I said earlier. So the exam, it consists of 40 multiple choice questions, which you will have 1 hour to complete, and these questions are from content presented in Sarah's lectures. Please note that the exam can only be attempted once, therefore do not attempt the exam until you are certain you are ready. You're required to complete the homework from each week before you can access the exam and earn your certificate, and this can be done until the close of the exam period. Again, we recommend not leaving that to the last moment, and you will have 1 week to do it. It is released at the 18th of April, and the course will be available, as I said, for 1 week. You have until 11:59 Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 25th of April to complete it. If you have any problems when you are completing it, please email us at shortcourses@itmasters.edu.au. If you have any sort of technical issues with that, we'll try and jump on that one. So 18th of April for 1 week, 40 questions, 1 hour, and it's a 50% pass mark. So the questions are sort of geared towards a low pass mark, so they might be a little bit difficult. If you do have any more questions about the exam, feel free to send them in. We've still got a few minutes to go. If you have any further questions, there's a couple. Yes, so for us, I'll repeat it, 18th of April until the 25th of April. You'll get a reminder email 1 day after the exam opens up. So yeah, just a 50% pass mark. All of the information is available at learn.itmasters.edu.au, the course page where all of the forums are and all of these sorts of things. So that should cover your exams. Got a question from Nita. Can Prince 2 and Agile work together? I'm not familiar with Prince 2, but
I'm not hugely familiar with Prince 2. It's not something that I've been involved in, but my understanding is that it's very structured, and I would suggest that it is going to be contradictory to a number of Agile manifesto principles and mind shifts. But I'm going to be honest on that one. I don't know enough about Prince 2, but my understanding is it's quite structured and set this and that and the other. And I did one certified Agile essentials course for a company where they had a lot of managers came in, and just they wanted to know what Agile was about. You know, they were thinking about it. And I had a guy, I can't think of his name now, but I had one guy who'd recently done Prince 2. And every time I start talking about what they do in Agile, it seemed to blow his mind. So yeah, that's you know, as I've said, being honest, I'm not I don't know a huge amount about Prince 2, but my understanding is that they're very contradictory with Agile.
Okay, got some interesting comments coming through too. Some saying it's a waterfall system. Others are saying that they've released a Prince 2 with Agile method. So yeah, quite interesting.
Well, you know, as I said before, I've just going on. I've admitted that I'm not I don't know a huge amount about Prince2. That's not what I'm here to talk about. But you know, as I've said previously, you can mix other things. It just needs a little bit more coordination and planning than typically we would like to do in Agile, you know. That's normally what happens.
Yeah, it seems to defeat the purpose to some extent.
I don't disagree, but that's me.
Kevin has asked a question. What happens if a team doesn't finish a number of stories by end of sprint? Are they just rolled over to the next sprint? Just a repeat question.
It depends.
Yeah.
You remember that from last week? It really depends. You know, look, the one thing that they should not do, or I suppose, look, their goal is to deliver what they said they would in the sprint. Now, you know, obviously that sometimes things get in the way, but this is where we're saying you start small and you don't overestimate what you can do as a team. And it's probably the one thing that I see when I do the training courses where we have some practical exercises. People just think that they could build a you know, a 3-level townhouse, you know, when realistically they might get a slab laid, you know, in the time frame. So if they don't deliver, it's not a good thing because you know, there has to be trust. We talked about trust in the team with the product owner. You know, if you as a team don't deliver what you've said to me you'll deliver, then am I going to trust you when you tell me next time? And it can cause issues with the communication and collaboration aspects of it. So if they don't deliver, then it really depends what the product owner wants to do and whether what wasn't delivered is still the top of the list. Yeah, it's a big depends, but I hope I've answered it.
Let us know if not. We'll go to Jeremy's question and then maybe just one or two more and then we'll have to wrap up. Jeremy's asked, how would you respond to a criticism of Scrum that the Scrum framework has not changed, therefore it does not follow its own methodology?
It has changed since it was first invented. I mean, it was ages ago, you know, years ago. I can't remember the stats off the top of my head. But, you know, why change something that is working? I mean, I know they talk about adaptability and change, but that's within how the team works, and I do think that's what it's simply a framework with some guidelines. It's not set in stone. So you know, you could argue, well, why would you need to change? Because it's not, it just has these ceremonies in it, just has these guidelines which we were talking about. It's just a way of framing and supporting teams that, you know, work well and achieve what they need to achieve because they're being allowed to do that themselves rather than being dictated to. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not for everybody, but it is, as we said, the most popular model being used.
Thanks. We'll have a look. Maybe that might be it, I think. Yeah, I think that will have to do for today. Got some more questions that I'm sorry we couldn't get to. But I guess that really just leaves me to say thank you to James and Leanne from Planet, Mia, Jess and James from IT Masters, and a massive thank you to you, Sarah, for the last few weeks. It's been a real pleasure working with you and been a big challenge for me to, again, sort of change my conceptions of how projects might work. Of course, massive thanks must go to you, the students, as well, for not only your attendance, but for contributing both during the webinars with your questions and in the discussion forums. So I might leave you, Sarah, to lead the last hurrah. So good night to you all and good luck with your exams. And please remember the feedback survey after the course. I remember you all promised me that you'd do it, so let us know what you're thinking. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Guy. It's been a pleasure for me too. I've had great fun. It's my first webinars, so it's been something different and interesting for me, and the guys, all of you guys at IT Masters have made it such an enjoyable experience, and it's been really good actually answering questions, and I'm just so happy to see so many people being interested, and you know, if they're Melbourne based, maybe I'll see them on a course. I'd like to see that.
Here's hoping. Alrighty, well, thanks very much, folks. If you do have any questions, feel free to email us, but good luck and goodbye.